Goedemiddag iedereen en welkom bij Fleddypalooza 2022. Het komende uur gaan wij het hebben over Belgische metal. We gaan meningen uitwisselen, ervaringen, best practices, op zoek naar een antwoord op de centrale vraag: wat is de staat en toekomst van de Belgische metalscene? Want de voorbije jaren zijn er boeken, documentaires, podcasts, shows uitgebracht over de geschiedenis van onze scene. Maar hoe zit het met de toekomst ervan? En kunnen we überhaupt spreken van een Belgische metal scene? En ik heb 4 gasten verzameld vandaag met wie dat we deze vragen gaan bespreken. Eerst een klein beetje informatie. We gaan dit panel opnemen, zodat we het later kunnen verspreiden, voor onderzoek kunnen gebruiken. En we gaan het ook in het Engels voeren, zodat internationaal publiek er ook van kan genieten. So, without further ado, I'm going to switch to the lingua franca right now of the international metal industry, and I'm going to ask my dear panelists to introduce them first, starting left to right. Ilse, who are you, what do you do, and how is it related to Belgian metal?
Well, I'm Ilse. I founded RIM Gent 9 years ago. And that was because of the metal scene in Ghent. It was a bit dead at the moment, and we wanted to do something back to the community. Then a few years later, we started Asgaard, a metal venue, but also a youth club, also in Ghent. I also work for Alcatraz as press officer and in Art Center Vooruit. And I also wrote my master thesis in psychology about metal and adolescence.
That's quite a handful. Didier.
Hello, my name is Didier Gossens, not to be confused with the other Didier here. I'm a bit of a slasher in the music industry. My main job is working for Impala, which is the European Association of Independent Record Labels. I'm also the spokesperson for the Federation of Festivals, of Music Festivals in Wallonia and Brussels. I'm in charge of the music programmation in a small venue called Le Vecteur in Charleroi. And I run a small record label called Black Bastard Records, which happens to have a few, let's say, metal-related releases.
Nele.
Hello, I'm Nele Buis. I'm one of the founders of Consoling Sounds, label based in Ghent. We work with experimental music with a dark aesthetic. And this also includes metal bands, so like to help bands evolve to professional level. Yeah, that's about it.
I remember never to call Consoling Sounds just a metal label. And finally, Andries.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andries. After more than 25 years of playing in bands, multiple bands, all hardcore and metal bands, 4 years ago I started doing podcasting. A weekly podcast called Welcome to the AA, which is a podcast where we have guests. It's a long-form interview format where we have guests going from philosophers to famous people, actresses, actors, but also musicians and a lot of metal musicians as well. And that resulted in a radio show I host on a digital radio station, Willy, called Staalhart, something I do for 2 seasons now. Every Thursday in prime time, I play all the new releases. So that's probably the reason why I sit here.
Well, yes, actually, because you do this weekly show, I wanted to ask you first. You're someone who has a lot of knowledge about what is happening in terms of metal, not just internationally, but also in our local scene. Really plays a lot of local bands, not just metal, but local music in general. So I wanted to ask you first if you feel like there is a Belgian metal scene, if this is something you can recognize.
Yeah. There's obviously a Belgian metal scene because there are bands out of Belgium. So I think it depends on how you look at it. From a global point of view, I think it's from what I remember from all the years I've been involved with music, I think this generation we have at least a handful of Belgian metal bands that are legit headliners abroad, which is a very important thing. It's not the same as playing abroad. I mean, there's many Belgian bands that are invited to play and even tour, but I think we only have a handful. We all know those bands, they do really well. But that itself is an amazing achievement, given the fact that this is a very small country. When it comes down to the local scene, I obviously get a lot of the new releases. I think it's pretty decent. I think it's okay. I mean, I could obviously say it's amazing and it's fantastic, but I assume this is a panel, so we can be a little bit more critical. For me, I think what's very cool about the nowadays generation of bands is that there are no longer very bad bands. I don't think that every band I get in my mailbox is the next best thing. I don't think so. It would be very weird, because then we obviously would know. But I remember like 20 years ago, everybody knows that feeling whenever there was a demo coming out of Sweden or Norway. Many of those bands, you never heard of them. They never toured our regions, but they were always sounding very good. It was always decent, what we call the Scandinavian efficiency. That was something that was not really a thing here. But these days, all the bands sound amazing. Doesn't really matter what kind of genre. They all work very hard. It's usually a fact, and I think my colleagues here will say more about that. It's sometimes more about having some personality, an original sound. But the level itself, the difference is huge compared to, let's say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I find it very interesting how you say that there is a difference between being abroad, being known abroad, and I think we can all mention those bands up from the top of our heads, bands like Amen-Ra and Brutus, Channel Zero, but also there's a difference between that and being known abroad, where there's a lot more Belgian bands that sign with international labels. Nele, as someone who is in the label industry themselves, is this something you can get behind, that you see that there's this difference between going abroad and being known abroad? Is it easy for a Belgian band to grow to this next level?
You're asking too many questions at once, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. First, I agree with Andries that this moment we have very few good headliners, and actually he touched upon it. It's not easy in a small country to grow to that level, because you start with your local scene, and that's where you have to work with to build and get further. But our local scene is very small, so actually you almost automatically from the very first have to try to be international. So even if you're not headlining yet, but you get the opportunity to play abroad and play a lot abroad, and I think that's maybe unique in the metal scene in Europe, that there is such an international network, even for bands that are not the big headliners yet. So there is an opportunity to grow. And I must say, speaking from an international perspective and the reactions I get when I am abroad, a lot of people always tell me, oh, it's great what's happening in Belgium. So if we're going to touch on the communities and the differences between that, and that internally, of course, we have this situation, but there is at the moment some kind of appreciation of what's happening in Belgium, so we must be doing something right. So is it easy? No, it's never easy, but I think compared to other countries that we are at the moment riding a good wave or something, that's my feeling at least.
Ilse, I see you nodding. Is this something you get behind?
Well, I think that at the moment we are going in the right direction. There are more chances for bands to get booked also in the bigger venues. The danger in Belgium is that as a band you keep on playing the youth houses, and that's the thing you keep on doing. You have to get on a bigger level, there was nothing really in between the youth clubs and the club circuit. Why it was really hard to make that really big jump. And I think at the moment we are doing a great job as a scene to try and close that gap.
Yes, exactly. The jump is very big, and it doesn't only depend on the quality of the band, and the quality of the bands and the opportunities to play. There's this whole network of organizations that come into play, management and bookers and whatever venues that will offer opportunity. Bigger venues, bigger festivals that will offer opportunity for local talent. It's so important to make it possible, and there's been some evolutions, but on the other hand, there's
we're still not there.
No, we're still not there. So yeah, many challenges as well.
Yeah. Didier, you're someone who is located with their work. Many of us here are in Flanders located professionally. You're located in Wallonia. And I often get the feeling when I research the Belgian metal scene that I often only end up finding information about either bands from Flanders or about bands from Wallonia. How, just to get us a bit acquainted with how the work goes for you, how do you go about this, getting bands into the club circuit, for example?
Well, funnily enough, I've always joked about the fact that if you start in Wallonia, it's probably going to be easier to get your first show in Marseille before you get Antwerp. It doesn't make sense from a geographical point of view, but it goes with that kind of language and culture area. Yeah, there are different things. I think the way we communicate with the territory in Wallonia is already quite different from Flanders. Like Wallonia is half the population of Flanders, but it's bigger in terms of territory, meaning you will have like a few spots which are not really interconnected, as it might more easily be the case in Flanders. That's probably just the beginning of an explanation. But I guess in terms of mobility of artists, it's already explained a lot of things. Globally, something, because I would really like to go back to your first question, something that I think is worth underlining over the last few years from a record label perspective is I do not think we've ever seen so many Belgian metal acts being signed to key foreign record labels. Back in the days, the idea of having bands signed to SPV or Napalm or Death Wish or Pelagic Records was unheard of, and nowadays it's like you have an announcement of that type every month, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been increasing enormously, and I think there's a lot of bands. The first band playing here today was recently signed to Pelagic. Is this something, from a record label point of view, that helps the Belgian metal scene, or could it be hurting the scene also, that they are signing to foreign labels? Nele, as a label manager yourself, what do you think?
This was not a question that we prepared.
No, but it is a single question instead of three.
I don't know why it would be hurting the scene. I think it's gives these bands big opportunities. It's very inspirational to beginning bands and young musicians that they have something to aspire to. I think
sorry to interrupt. It's a different ballgame in Nele. If you get signed international, it's a different. The world becomes a lot bigger. Eh? Don't you feel like if you have a Belgian band that gets, isn't it even better for your own record sales here in Belgium? If you know that a band is doing really well outside it too.
Yeah, of course, but I'm still trying to get to the core of your question, actually trying to imagine why it would be a bad thing. Yeah. I do think that the game rules in maybe the metal part of the music industry are on the level of beginning and independent bands very different from how it works for general pop rock bands. There's a lot more importance of community and all these things, and when you then enter this professional world, it can be a very different feeling and a very different approach, and that might be very contrasting and maybe not so much of an expected evolution for a young band if they get into this other world. So yeah. You're nodding. Please finish my sentences.
I'm agreeing.
So if I'm getting you right, if you go international as a band, there's a lot more opportunities. There's a lot more institutions to support you. Is that kind of those industry that you need as a band? Not just talking about labels, but also live opportunities. We were talking just now how you said that there's not a lot between the youth house circuit and the club circuit. Is this something that the Belgian scene needs to grow in still? We've been talking about how it's been going upwards, how it's been getting better than 20 years ago. Is this something then that the Belgian scene can improve in? in terms of its future, that there need to be more live opportunities, there need to be more rehearsal spaces, more labels? Andries, I see you.
I don't think so. I think, I mean, it can always get better, but I don't think it's impossible to start a band. I think there's on every level, there's people like Ilse. I mean, you need those steps. I mean, it's very weird if you would go from your rehearsal room to, let's say, a main stage Graspop. That would be weird. Wouldn't make any sense. I think the only thing that I always found annoying when I was on the other side playing in bands is that as soon as you get out of the underground part, so to speak, is always that when it comes down to metal, there was always some tendency from mainstream media outlets and even venues to not take it serious. We all know it's all funny and it's all fun and games, but you know, when there's some metal in mainstream, it always needs to be some kind of carnivalesque kind of thing. We always have to yell Slayer, which is a very cool thing to do, but it's not like that's the only thing we're doing. And I mean, it's not like we ask alternative people or alternative artists to do some Bob Dylan impression when they're doing it. And that's something that I always found annoying. And that's why it's important, there's people like this, let's take it serious. Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that mainstream media, whatever it is, whatever you can call it, can still improve.
I think that you're talking about the appreciation of the artistry of the metal genre and how it has this specific artistry that is not often understood from outside world, and maybe
it's just shouting, right?
Is
they all have long hair, but they look so evil, but they're all such kind people.
I think a longing to get this recognition, even on a higher level. At the same time, you're like drowning in these commercial marketing schemes. And then you have this true cult people that when it gets too commercial, we don't want to hear about it anymore, which is basically, sorry, is bullshit. Everybody that makes art does it to reach as many people as possible. So why not have the ambition to grow and even, you know, but you have to go along with this other schemes coming from other parts of music industry. Yeah, and you're always kind of on a seesaw. You have these people that don't want to follow bands that get too commercial, and then by having these other international opportunities, they reach a lot more people, and it's always a very difficult struggle that I know a band like Amara struggles with all the time. They want to keep their artistry, they want to, but they want to reach more people. So that's something that I think is typical of the metal scene and don't see much in other scenes, or maybe
it's been like that since the 80s. Yeah. Having to write a ballad to get to the mainstream media.
Yeah, but it's the reaction within the scene that I always find very, very interesting. You have this part of the scene that doesn't want to know about it, and they like it's because we are rooted in it's an anti-movement,
anti-establishment, anti-commercialization. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of. It's a weird thing, I think, because we live in times when everybody that has some patience and puts some effort into it can make a professional album, even in your own living room, because you know the technology is there and the knowledge is available. So there's so many possibilities to, you know, build a band, build a good artistic project. But why is there sometimes such an anti-movement to, you know, growing further? And well, that's my feeling.
Yeah. No, I completely understand. And Ilse, I want to touch on something that we've been discussing quite a lot, because you wrote your master thesis on metal and mental health. And I've often come across this in my research, that people start paying more attention, especially abroad, to metal when they start to see that it's good for something more. It's not just noise, it's not just dudes with long hair that smell like sweat but turn out to be very friendly people that hug each other all the time. pulling all of the stereotypes out of the closet right now, but that people start to pay more attention when they see metal can do something more. It can be used to address issues like colonization. It can be used to address mental health. It can be something crucial to bring people together, to form communities. And this is something that you and Grim Gent focus a lot on. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
My master thesis was mainly about how young people can cope with their problems and build their social identity. So I think that's a big part, like the community, the social identity that you build as an adolescent. This is really the core of your being. It's a very lonely period of time where you're searching for yourself. And that's what metal really brings to those people. It's like the alienation that you have as a youngster. That is what metal addresses. So there's a really great message in that. And it's also the young people who can look up to their idols and see like they feel the same. This is normal. It's okay. But we can all be alone together. But that's the community thing about it.
And is this something you also focus on with Grim Gent? Because it's at least in Flanders, as far as I know, it's quite a unique community to have like a live venue to also focus on this identity and community building. You're also developing an app. So it's quite a whole lot of things that you're doing at once that all come down to metal all of the time.
Yeah, that's like, we reason a lot about it, and the thing we want people to know is that there's a lot more around and about metal than only the gigs. We want to address everything in the community. That's also why at our website we have columns about metal movies, metal books, even tattoos. So that's the thing. There's a lot more in our community that brings us together than just the music. It's also, everything around it.
Yeah. Didier, how about you? You work with an international organization, Impala, with Le Vecteur. Is this also something you try to focus on?
You mean in terms of perception of metal?
Absolutely.
Globally, we try to work on that. We try to pay attention to it, but I think there's still kind of that elephant in the room when you discuss that. What I've always thought is really strange and funny is that who in this room would define himself or herself as being a metal fan? Usually you describe yourself as being a metal fan to people who do not listen to metal. Between us, we will discuss about the different genres. If you're more into sludge, into death, into beatdown, hardcore, you name it. And we are, because of that, also fighting, I think, against a global perception of the scene. You know, that's the cliche in France. In the week ahead of Hellfest, you can really expect national news to do a focus on metal fans going to a festival. It's usually a 50-something drunk guy with a Motorhead t-shirt who on purpose will show his horse on TV. That's what they expect, because that's the message that is sent to non-metal people about what metal might be. So I've always felt there is that big issue of perception and work between people who are kind of already in the family or in the community, you name it the way you want, and the people who are outside it. And that's something in Belgium that's also very, very not perceptible in the press or whatever in terms of coverage of what's happening. Yeah. You will just have those kind of one-offs. Salman Ra is probably one of them. You know, they've been in more mainstream news because some journalists will realize something is happening that's probably bigger than just that scene, but that's about it. So how can you work on that? It's always the big issue. I guess the work is different depending on who you're talking to.
Which is why I brought people together from the live industry, the radio industry, the label industry, to get a bit of a full picture of things, because I agree that there's not one solution to how can we change this perception, but I want to open the floor for inputs, because we're talking about the future of the Belgian metal scene, and I think with that should also come a change in perception, not just to make the scene more accessible to people, to get new people to access the scene, to get new bands, but to also make sure that the scene survives so that artists can keep making their art. Nele, I want to ask you first, because you're someone who's very involved with getting artists supported, funded in any way. What is your idea? What is necessary to make metal not just more acceptable, but also change the perception of it?
I was already thinking to ask you the question, or maybe, just making it explicit. Why do we crave so much that the perception changes? Because, of course, I heard Ilse talk, and it's also something that we also try to do and explain, that metal is about more than just all the stereotypes. But other genres apparently don't feel the need to do this, while I'm sure that other people get this mental whatever also from just a pop song. But why are we becoming so desperate almost to explain that we have valuable music? I think it's because of the fact that we understand that the jump is high, the wait is long, there's a lot of valuable music and very professionally made, and there's a craving to be artistically recognized, but also to have that turn into like some kind of government funding, even if it's not direct government funding, that there's funding of organizations or venues or whatever, so that there's more possibilities for bands to play, to get exposure, to get support. But it's not an easy thing. As you know, I'm also involved in commissions of the Flemish government, where pop and rock applications are filed. And actually, I'm not liberty to speak in detail about what is there, and probably by the fact that I'm critical now, they might never ask me again. But honestly, after 5 years, I've had it. So ready to say that I've totally had it, because every time that an application arrives there, they measure it up to ways it works in other genres, and then they say, it doesn't work like it's in this, so it must be amateuristic. Oh, that's not good, so up to the bin with it. And it's very difficult to get some recognition for the fact that in the music that we work with, it just goes, there's a long tail strategy often, it goes very slow, but that doesn't make it less valuable. Well, and of course you always have to look at this community level, I mean Flemish level or Walloon level, exactly because it's a small niche and you step up your game and go internationally very fast. You don't have to ask it in your local city or town, because they will.
No, but that's the issue with these long-tail strategies, that, of course, there's not a lot of room for blockbusters. So that's a problem,
because I also see that in like folk music, for example, it's totally different. And then when you see experimental jazz music, I mean, bands like Stuff or Nordman or whatever, 30 years ago, they would also be playing, at the back end of a bar, but at a certain moment, all these people in the jazz scene said, well, we've had enough of it, let's get organized, let's just get everything going. Now you have Jazz Lab and you get all these applications, they go on through, they get a lot of money, and then the reaction when I talk about it in the metal scene is, yeah, but we don't need that money. And I think, well, okay, if you don't need it, but you have to know that these other bands will get it. So why would you, with your artistic project, not be entitled to? I mean, of course, there are some bands that will have it, but you see often that they have to comply to a certain way of working that is not necessarily their own way of working, or not their artistic, or sometimes damages their artistic project. They're trying to do something that they're actually not doing, simply because they just don't understand how metal music works and how valuable it is.
Ilse?
Yeah. That's really a big thing. I think that we as a scene work differently from other scenes. That's also something that I addressed to Vibe. Like we work with Soundtrack, Vibe, all those things that are built for starting bands. But
I always come to the conclusion that those things don't certainly work for us, and that we should actually work something out ourselves to get metal bands the right support. And yeah, that's really difficult.
I often get the feeling, though, I, for example, live in Hasselt, and it's been a very long time that, for example, metal bands did not come to the Musicodrome, that I had to go to Antwerp or to Ghent or to Arlon, for example, to see a band. And I often get the feeling that this kind of collaboration that we need is something that in metal, Belgian metal, is very difficult, because we are not only, as a country, divided by a language border, with Brussels somewhere in the middle, we're also divided by the provinces. We often speak about the scene in Ghent. We all know the 8000 scene in Yper. As someone who lives in Flanders, I'm the first to admit that I have very little idea about what is happening in the metal scene in Wallonia. Didier, I know you are working on this kind of stuff, this collaboration across these borders of provinces. How is this something that we need to do? Why is this something we need to do more?
Well, we need to do it more, if only because if we want to see careers of bands expanding, they need to tour more. Belgium in itself is already too small, never mind Flanders is too small, or Wallonia is too small. But obviously we bump into issues that are applicable to the whole music sector. It's different medias, different coverage, and being in charge of programmation in a small venue, that's what happens all the time. It's the way the projects are pitched to you. Like you might have acts that are very successful in Flanders, and then the arguments you will get is that they played that venue in Antwerp, that venue in Ghent, they are on Stubru, they do this and do that. Great. For us, it doesn't mean anything. End of the day, we might be next door, but marketing-wise, communication-wise, it's just like pitching your project to someone in the Czech Republic or in Romania. It does not transfer. So I guess the big question in Belgium, and it's not just applicable to metal, I think it's to the whole music sector, is really trying to open gates in between the two communities, or even the three, if you consider our German-speaking friends near Open. Yeah. But funnily enough, there's an ongoing project from both sides of the country going at the moment, like, please pitch your project so we can do this. And it has an impact. I remember having bands on my record label playing We Are Open in Tricks, and then suddenly you have that feeling the gates are opening, like you can talk to the people in Flanders. But that's not just a metal issue, that's probably just a music sector issue, and it comes with one key fact, and it's not only the language, is that culture, and meaning including music in Belgium, is not a competency of the government anymore. It's a competency of the regions. And if you look at the cultural policies between Flanders and Wallonia, it's just two different worlds. Like, from a metal perspective in Wallonia, can we complain about the support we get from the government? No. I think most bands that are pitching something will get it. And the other thing is that you have less players. But yeah, for Flanders, I will just let my colleagues comment on that, but it's just two different worlds.
Mm-hmm. Andries, you're someone with one of the biggest medias in terms of getting people to access metal. You're flying into this then from a completely different perspective. How do you see this? How do you think we should make these collaborations more? How do we make these possible from your experience?
Yeah, there's going to be some incoming cliches, obviously, but
fire away.
Just do it. It's maybe it's. I mean, I have a hardcore punk background. I learned a lot of things over there. I was very fortunate to be in a band that did really well in the second wave of hardcore. So it's a scene thing. I know the importance of a scene. I think the metal scene has always been really good because it was way bigger than, let's say, the hardcore scene over here. But I think sometimes that's a little bit a problem because there's a little bit of complacency, if that's a correct word, because it's not really small, but it's not really big either. But I do feel that if you keep on banging on those doors, things will happen. That's for sure. But what I think is very interesting is definitely, and that's why I'm very happy Didier is here. It's the southern thing, the northern southern thing. It's still so crazy. I've experienced many times in my own musical career. It's like Didier says, it's very hard to get shows in the southern part of Belgium and vice versa. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's everything I've done so far with the radio station as well and with the podcasting is everything that annoyed me when I was playing myself, I sworn that I would not do it over here while I'm on the other side. And so far it helps. It works. You see all good results here. I believe, I think Nele said it as well. I think there's also some kind of misplaced DIY thing. Sometimes we metalheads and punk kids as well, we always feel ourselves a little bit too good to get money from the government. It feels like selling out. It's not our thing. It's the DIY thing. I think
nobody is going to stop making music because they don't get funding. But it's the thing about creating opportunities and equal opportunities and coming to the table equally. And that's actually what I think we should get over ourselves. You know, why wouldn't we have a place at the table? Why these? I go to these experimental jazz concerts. There's like 2 people in the room. When I go to a metal show, the room is full. Why shouldn't these bands get enough opportunity to just make this difference, to just get this little extra, to make this beautiful album? Let's get over ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Do it. I mean, that's what I had because I do the media thing. I mean, it's funny because we had. I'll give you 2 examples of guests we had.
Go ahead.
We had Sabaton, which is always something that people get crazy over. On the same time, we had Alkerdeel, which are totally 2 completely different guests. It's almost 35,000 people listen to an Alkerdeel episode. And let's be honest here, I love Alkerdeel.
Thank you for the record sales.
It's not everyone's music. It's very extreme. But what I learned from it was that it doesn't really matter. I mean, I have the same thing with the whole, you know, we all know it, and there's nothing as satisfying after a hard day's work is shit talking, like shit talking about bands. It's one of the coolest things in life. It relieves everybody. Everybody knows it. Everybody does it. It's okay. And I think it's fun, as long as it's comedic hate, if it's comedy, if it's fun, but it gets dangerous when we translated what Nele says, what Didier says, and what Ilse said as well, when the real enemies, which are the people...
It becomes a marker of distinction. We use it to really push others down.
Yeah, and you see it when you see like mainstream media, and that's why I'm very happy I'm in a position now where I can actually do something because I get paid by mainstream media, but the good thing is I can do whatever I want, and because people are listening, I can keep on doing what I want, which is very important. They're never going to change. They will always find a way to ridicule it, and we give it a little bit to them because it's funny to hate on people. It's funny. When you see those reviews of big metal fests, we all know what it is. I mean, you see sometimes big bands and they get like shitty reviews in big newspapers. You've ever seen that? No. You're like, because it's so small, it's a little thing, it's stupid, but it doesn't help our case. Like I said, all the having fun and making fun of other bands is cool, but let's do it like in a private thing, let's do it in a van, let's do it everywhere, but don't do it when you're actually in a position. And that's why it was very easy for me to make like a very cool radio show. I mean, it's not a hard thing to make sure you have a playlist of 2 hours of the most elite stuff you've ever heard in your life. It's not hard. It's very easy. But what I learned was it's way cooler if you add all those other genres as well. Yeah. Because there is no real unity in metal, but there's a lot of genres, something I really discovered the last couple of years.
We are not going into that discussion now.
But it's important we do that. And I think because it works. I saw it, I see it with my own eyes, I see it with the numbers. It's perfectly possible to do a show with like very underground black metal and play some Viking, folky, whatever gent thing afterwards. The world's not gonna end. I thought it would, but it doesn't. And I think it's one of those typical things that typical for a metal scene. We like to keep us down. What Neil says, what everybody here says.
Is it typical of the Belgian metal scene?
I was going to say the same thing. Is it something Belgian or is it something Didier?
Well, there's something quite interesting. Know that we're touching about our own relationship with our community. There's a book that was released like a couple of months ago in the US called Sellout, which looks at 12 examples of punk hardcore bands that made the big jump from smaller indie record labels to majors.
Which bands were in it?
Thrice, Jawbreaker, The Distillers, Rancid. You get quite a few. It goes from pretty much 94 to 2010-ish. And the fact that some of those bands basically got bashed by the old community for making the jump, and when it went wrong with the majors, there was no way back. And the key question I have behind that is, can we complain about lack of attention, about lack of support, about lack of access, while at the same time, every time we see people coming from our community getting that success or actively looking for that success, we bash them.
We push them down, yeah.
You know, like, it's kind of a lose-lose situation. So is it basically a question for ourselves? What do we expect? You know, and we will always prefer to remember seeing that band back in the days in Steve's basement in that village in the Kempen that we have forgotten the name of.
And everybody was there.
And everybody was there.
Absolutely.
It has happened plenty of times. You know,
from the ceiling.
There were 12 people, but actually, you know, 150 people who were there. It happens all the time. Yeah, we cannot really complain. We're even at that level where Graspop is pretty much what we call G5 festival in Belgium. It's one of the 5 bigger ones, together with Werchter and Pukkelpop and Doer and Tomorrowland. And we're at that point where it's even becoming dangerous for some acts to play there, because you will have people saying, "Oh,
you're a
they sold out. They sold out. They went mainstream." No, is Graspop mainstream? It's a successful event, but does that make them mainstream? I still don't think so.
I actually have a follow-up question about that, and what I've been hearing is a lot of things now that need to change bottom up. We need to take ourselves more seriously. We don't need to push ourselves down. We need to also be a bit more, I would say, arrogant, but in a healthy way, and say, hey, we're a serious community, we're serious artists, time for you to take us seriously and give us a seat at the table. But then at the same time, you still have top-down this kind of perspective that it's not a serious industry, that it's not profitable, that it's a hobby, that it's all noise, and we go back into the stereotypes. Is it also important to show that it's a profitable industry? I'm thinking of you, Ilse, because you work with Alcatraz, which recently started the European Metal Festival Alliance, which is quite unheard of. Can you explain what this alliance is and how it can contribute to showing that metal is a profitable industry? Because I think it's quite important to know this.
Yeah, it's a really, really great project. I really love it. It's about the second wave of summer festivals, the smaller summer festivals working together. And it shows how great our community is, and that the bands get chances to tour the different festivals. And when we work together, that it makes a great tour to do that, instead of just picking out shows separately.
Because they do, so they share bands, but it's also about sharing know-how, it's about sharing revenues, it's about sharing
also panels and
terms and agreements also. Because it's Alcatraz, I think Summer Breeze is on it, Motoculture in France,
Brutal Assault, Metal Days, it's a lot.
But this is something that can show that the Belgian music industry, Belgian metal industry, is also a profitable industry. Do you think that this can help to show that it's something to take serious? It can help to get Belgian metal a seat at the table?
Well, I think we have to be fair and just accept that we need government funding to grow our scene.
we need the funding to also pay our bands fairly. To not play as a band, play for a few bottles of beer, but get a decent fee. If we don't have funding as venues or labels or anything in the scene, we can't support the bands. We can't grow our scene. We can't make the bigger shows happen. We can't make the bigger experiences for the bands happen, and then you can't close the gap. We need those fundings to support our own scene, and yeah, okay, maybe that's not true or something, but yeah, we need it.
What is true, after all? Didier, how about you? You're working with, like you said, culture in Belgium is divided between Flanders and Wallonia. Is this something that you see also in the scene in Wallonia? This call that we need government support or government funding in order to grow the stages in Wallonia?
It's actually something that probably 12 years ago, someone from the government actually told me. It's like, you can be very posh, very hipster, saying we don't do funding, we're not like that, we're DIY, we're tougher than you, we do it better. It's like, end of the day, if you don't take it, someone else that you may even dislike is going to take it. So go and take it. What is true, and it's not only in Belgium, is that I guess the genres of music we are listening to are pretty much underrepresented in the groups that are supervising that funding, be it in Wallonia or in Flanders. Once again, it's not impossible to join those groups. You just have to pitch yourself. It happens that we come from a community that is pretty shit at doing it. I've been thinking, and it's at the same time a very funny and a terrible example. You have something going on in France which is called the Metal Social Club, which is pretty much a club of people active in the music industry who just listen to metal. That's kind of a secret club. You have people who basically publicly would never say they listen to metal because officially they are in charge of the digital distribution of hip-hop acts and all that, so they are afraid they would lose their jobs because of it. So, I mean, it's not a disease, you know, we're just listening to a specific genre of music, there's nothing to be ashamed of, but that still happened. And I guess that what Neil said, like that jazz, you could say to some extent is probably overrepresented in those instances, deciding funding. It's not like, do we start a war against jazz? It's just a question, do we want to be at the table? And I'm convinced we can be at the table.
Yes, that's the problem. I think I'm one of the few people in those commissions right now who comes from the metal scene. Yeah. And it's always the same thing. I always have to explain again. And then when there is an application, I can't judge it because I'm too closely involved.
That's what I wanted to ask also. I had it written down as a bonus question, so to say. But who from our scene should join, not to dictate that some people should or should not, but more as in what kind of expertise from the Belgian metal scene would be most useful in those committees in order to get the scene to grow as fast and as good as possible?
Nele, of course, I think.
Oh my God.
Nele and Didier.
It's something always...
Which one? There's two.
Yeah.
No, you don't need to answer that.
But it's just, it's difficult to say. I mean, you have to want to do it. It's not like,
it sounds like a boring job.
It's it's very intense. You have to take your time for it and, do it in an ethical way. It's important. It's not that I have to read a lot of stuff about a lot of different types of music, but I've learned a lot about it. So if people feel like they could play a role in that, why maybe you, Ilse?
Or anyone here present today.
Well, it must say it's important that you kind of are professionally active in the scene in some way, so that you can show that you have some kind of experience. But actually everybody can ask to be a member. And that's also, I think, you have to be aware that it takes time to do it, but it's not like I have to be actively interested in all kinds of other, but you learn from it as well. So it's very interesting. You get to learn a lot of people, but it's not just that, it's just a structural problem. And it also has to do, of course, with the fact that we are a small geographical region that we cannot take away from it. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do. At the end of the day, that's my conclusion.
I want to move on with about 10 minutes left. I want to move to a slightly different topic, but I guess it's related to everything we've been talking about today. I'm going to draw from my own research experience and compare Belgium, if we can, to countries that treat metal like a veritable export product. You have countries like Sweden, like Finland, like the United States, the UK, where there is this kind of top-down support. Is this something we can see as possible for Belgian metal music as well in the future? Once these kind of changes in the institutions are achieved, once we can see more support for the Belgian scene? Andries, I see you, again, getting a bit icky. Can Belgian metal music be a national or a regional export product? I'm talking about it in very commercial language right now, I know.
Economical language.
Economic, commercial.
I don't know. I think the fact that you don't know is probably already an answer. I think it's whatever we said today. I feel we all, the four of us, share the same thing. It's a respect thing, and not respect as in a schoolyard kind of thing. But whenever you bring it up, there will be somebody who's not taking it serious. So. I don't really have an answer, but I want to bring in something from my expertise. I work for a very commercial. I work for DPG Media, which is all about money. And the thing is, whenever it works, all doors go open, which is not really a big surprise. But for some reason, that's why I can do what I can do, for instance, and I get paid for it, and I can do it between 4 in the afternoon and 6 in the afternoon, which is still weird if you play Mayhem or Portal at right after 5 o'clock news, but because people are listening and because advertisement is okay. That's something I know firsthand. But then again, I see all these festivals. Everybody here is involved in very successful things. For some reason, let's take Graspop, let's take Alcatraz, because they're the big ones. That's what is Graspop these days? 140,000, 120,000, doesn't really matter. But for some reason, then it doesn't matter. I mean, that's a lot of people, huh? That's a lot of money they're making.
It comes back to the same thing that I was saying before, how to show that it's a profitable industry.
So it is a profitable industry.
We've been talking during the pandemic how much people, and there were protest marches here in Brussels for the cultural industries to show how many people were laid off during it. I mean, we're in the AB, where they were suffering from the same consequences.
Didier, I think it's a PR thing. It's what Neil said, what Didier said, what Ilse said. It's because obviously there's a lot of money to be made with metal, and also with the level underneath. I mean, things like this is pretty crazy. I mean, we're playing in Belgium's most beautiful venue. It's here, but I don't know. It's is it self-confidence? What is it? How is it possible that when you work pure from a commercial standpoint of view, there's at my workplace, nobody complains. Everybody's like, people are listening, we're making money, it's fine. Graspop is doing well, everybody's doing okay, but for some reason there's no pride in it. I don't know.
How can we, maybe as a final closing question, just do the rounds? How can we get metal a better rep? What can we do to make sure that not just the scene survives, but also thrives? Ilse?
I think we have to work together and communicate also with our friends from Wallonia. We are sometimes seeing our own colleagues too much as concurrents and as people we have to work with, and we have to do it together, because otherwise, if we keep on complaining about each other or putting down bands or other organizations, then we won't get anywhere.
Didier.
I think it's pretty much about claiming what is ours. You see it if you, for example, look at the streaming figures. Metal is doing well. It's just that there's that tendency to kind of downgrade ourselves, and I'm really talking about our own community, our own sector. But if you look at it from a strictly business perspective, oh my God, I said business.
It shouldn't be a dirty word.
It shouldn't be a dirty word,
metal.
but it's about just claiming what is ours and what's already been proven, be it in terms of funding and of market access and so on. Metal globally is doing very well, thank you.
Nele?
I think it's also, I agree with everything my colleagues said. I think it's also important to realize that being proud of what we do is not only important for ourselves, but also important for the diversity of music in its entirety. Because we're moving into times where, like all media, it's monopolization, and it's also the same in music. But it's really important that also in music there's diversity of successful bands, of slightly less bigger bands, even of underground bands, and also in the genres. And that's exactly also one of the reasons why I think government funding is important. It's not only to lead bands to become a commercial success, it's also to support the smaller bands to keep this diversity alive.
And last but not least, Andries.
Nothing to add.
Then I think with that we can conclude our panel with a few minutes to spare, give the next band a little bit extra time to do their changeover. I want to thank everyone attending here today for being here with us. I hope you learned something new. I hope you found this inspirational. I want to thank Ilse, Didier, Nele, and Andries for being a wonderful panel, the AB and Fleddypalooza organization for helping us organize this. I was on a podcast a few months ago where I was talking about how we needed to do more of this, and having been able to do this with the four of you and everyone here in attendance has been a slight dream come true. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the festival, starting with Hippotraktor.
Thanks.